Let me start you off with this tweet. It was a tweet, and it is about a week old here at this point. I'm coming into it a little bit late, so my apologies on that. But Bud Elliott, popular podcast host, 24/7 Sports, Cover 3 podcast, think he does a great job, but he was responding to I guess I could say fan here, responding to a listener who said, it's hilarious to sit here and listen to you spew blank about how the Big 12 is closer to the G5 than it is to the ACC, SEC, and Big 10. And Bud Elliott says, in terms of having a league title contender, the Big 12 is closer to the G5 than the other three Power 4 leagues. I love the Big 12 for its entertainment value and competitiveness, but barring massive structural changes to college football, we'll all be dead before a Big 12 team wins the playoff. All right, so that's something that a lot of people are not going to love, right? Certainly not going to love hearing that from Bud Elliott there. If I were Daddy Wren, who looks like literally in his handle would be a West Virginia burner account, I probably would have just left that at the ACC Big 12 conversation and bring the SEC and Big 10 into it. I feel like that sets yourself up to be dunked on a little bit more. If you just keep it at the ACC, like we can probably have a conversation, and will, by the way, here in just a moment. But as it stands, I mean, it is the national media slamming the Big 12 again, and I got to admit, it kind of seems like they're right. Now, I don't love the tone of that from Bud Elliott, where it's like, all right, man, like maybe a little bit much on the, hey, we'll all be dead, but the content of what he's actually saying there, it's hard to really dispute. So, maybe we can massage the messaging a little bit there. Bud Elliott, who he is a guy, I mean, he's a Florida State background. Okay. So that's going to make him probably lean in even more to the ACC piece of it. So maybe West Virginia burner that I was just talking to, that wouldn't have actually mattered had you just kept it at the ACC. But look, I think if we're talking about national championship opportunity here, like it's all about talent. If you want to have enough ammo to be able to go out and win 3 or 4 games in a row against top 10 to 15 competition, like you saw what Ohio State's road was this year, Tennessee, what am I missing here? Tennessee, Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame. You want to rip off 4 straight wins against teams of that caliber, you're going to need, I don't know what the baseline is, minimum top 15, probably talent roster. And we do have the 24/7 talent composite, which measures this. I guess you could say it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good in terms of keeping track of all your roster and what they were originally as prospects, how much talent you actually, raw talent you have on your roster. There's not a Big 12 team in the top 20. There's not a Big 12 team in the top 25 right now, according to the talent composite. Last year, TCU was at 28, and that was the highest ranked team in the talent composite. Now, that's also fitting because TCU was the last team to play for a national championship from the Big 12. It happened in 2022 and, I guess early 23. And we all know how that ended, right? We remember that. I don't need to remind you about 65-7. Now, that's all-time good Georgia team. One of the better national champions I think we've ever seen. Like, that's a really, truly elite team. There was not a team out there at that level this year. 2022 TCU going up against, if they got to take on Notre Dame in the national championship game, they're not getting smacked around like that. I don't think they would get smacked around like that by this Ohio State team, even as great as they were at the end of the year. But you get the point. Like, TCU is as close as it gets, and they're at 28 in the talent composite. Yes, Arizona State, not anywhere close, top 25 in the talent composite, and they did come within one play of beating Texas. That is true. They played a phenomenal game, and Cam Scadaboo became a star, and it, in a lot of ways, earned some legitimate, real respect for the Big 12 out of that. But then you'd have to go, say the targeting gets called, right? Or they bat down a pass on 4th down. Okay, if that happens, you got to go do it again, and you're playing Ohio State next. And then if that happens, you got to go do it again. You're playing Notre Dame. You've got to replicate that 2 more times, and that feels like a bridge too far. You're gonna start to wear down And just, you would have, even if you're thinking about, hey, it's a coin flip game if you're playing at Texas and Ohio State or a Notre Dame, even if you believe that, which I think most people would not, but if you believe that, flip the coin 3 times, the odds of that happening, it's not a very likely thing to me. So I have a hard time really disputing it. It's a different beast, and I hate that is the reality and that it is that way. I mean, it brings me no pleasure to say that, and there's a big difference between me saying, hey, it's unlikely the Big 12 wins the national championship, and hey, the Big 12 will never win a playoff game against the SEC or the Big 10, because those are 2 completely different things. Hell, that TCU team that I was just talking about beat Michigan on its way to the championship game, which nobody seems to really remember or talk about. So the national championship part of it, tuck it away. It sucks. It is what it is. It's the reality. If you want to have a debate on the ACC, which to me is the more interesting part of this, then we can sit down and at least have that conversation, okay? As I mentioned, Bud Elliott, Florida State background, so probably more partial to the ACC and certainly more partial to Florida State and what they bring to the table. And look, for starters, hard to really blame him if he's going to lump the ACC in with the Big Ten and the SEC. Part of the reason that a lot of the conversation had gravitated toward Big 12 versus ACC, not just because clearly both leagues have been left behind in revenue, but it was also because of the uncertainty around the future of the ACC and what was going on there. Well, the tide has turned, we'll see if it lasts, but at least for the time being, the tide has turned back the other way on that, where it looks like the ACC now has some more stability. They got the ESPN option picked up on the contract. All the reporting seemed to suggest that they're at least in stages of negotiating, something that would drop the lawsuits between Florida State, Clemson, and the conference. It appears that the ACC is going to be secure for the next 5 or 6 years until we get to 2030 and everything starts to kick back up again. So if that's the case, that changes this convo a bit, because now we're talking about, all right, the brands of Miami, Clemson, and Florida State are going to be there. And not just the brands, but the talent. I was surprised going by how they performed recently. But if you go look at that talent composite that I mentioned, Clemson's number 5, guys. So now they don't look like that when they're actually out there on the field. They're not playing like that level of program. They have fallen off to just being a good program, not a great or an elite program. But they still clearly can get talent at a higher clip than anybody in the Big 12. Florida State is 13. And as bad as they looked this past year, they had a highly touted portal class, and they played to a 13-0 regular season and then ACC championship game just a year before they got screwed out of the playoffs. So they were close. They were there. Miami is the one that I have a harder time with. Okay, they're 14th in the composite. I know that they're going to get talent, but we're going on 2 decades now of Miami doing this song and dance. I got to see them prove it before I would really lump them into that category. But I also understand how you say, well, the ceiling is still technically there more, John, because they are consistently hitting in the top 20, top 15 in talent. Okay, all right. So despite the fact that I saw some Big 12 fans pushing back on this to Bud Elliott. I get it. You are correct. The Big 12 was an objectively better football conference than the ACC this past year. That is very true. Sanger and rankings showed it. The bowl and playoff performances certainly showed that. You've got that to hang your hat on. But unfortunately, 1 year does not make up for the talent gap. And really, it's not even just a talent gap right now, but a talent potential, a talent ceiling. Maybe that would be the better way to phrase it. You have a higher ceiling on the ACC because of what those teams have consistently showed that they can do in terms of accruing talent. Doesn't always work in practice. Doesn't always mean that it comes out to be that they go on to play like a top 10, top 15 team, or in Clemson's case, a top 5 team based on the talent that they have on the roster. But they at least have that upside there if they're going to be able to get those guys. And with a 1 year sample size on the Big 12 being the better league, it's kind of the same thing as the SEC this year. Look, I was there beating the drum as hard as anybody. The SEC was a special conference this year, but it also doesn't mean that because of one year, they just lose all the credibility for what they've done over the last 20 when they have definitely been the best conference in college football. Perhaps exaggerated a little bit, but obviously been the best conference in college football. So that would be my take on it. I do think Bud Elliott, unfortunately, is generally correct here and correct with all of it. And we'll see now if the Big 12 can go out and be better than the ACC again next year, and the SEC isn't as special next year, and the Big 12 breaks through and wins that game against Texas or whoever it might be in the playoff. Okay, like now we're talking about a trend in a second year and some more, but you do have to go do it more than just the 1 year. The other thing that's interesting here is it's not like the talent acquisition game is just like fixed and you're stuck 28 and below forever for the rest of your lives. I mean, we're seeing what is happening with Texas Tech right now, for instance, right? You can, especially in this unique era that we're in, which currently is wild, wild west, you can go out and if you have a multi-billionaire donor like Texas Tech does, build yourself a top 3 portal class. And if you start doing that over a couple of years, well, your talent composite's going to look a lot better. It's going to start to look a lot better. I still have my questions about how everything sorts out with NIL when you have to have fair market value deals and what that would mean for a situation like that with Tech. A lot of variables, but I think because there are so many variables, you have to stay open to the fact that something like that could happen. And you could have another team be able to enter that conversation, the high ceiling conversation, because of talent that they're able to add. But again, it will take time. That will take cycles of doing that. It will also take better high school recruiting to fuel the program with that, because the portal, you're going to have to like reload every year. So it will take time to really shoot up that talent composite, but Texas Tech appears to have the resources to do it.